So, in the last session, we were discussing topic 2, which is about the experimental techniques. And in experimental techniques, the first part we discussed the measuring apparatus which we commonly use in the lab. Then, how we can identify whether a substance is pure or impure. We can check the melting point, we can check the boiling point, or we can use chromatography. Now, in this section, we will study about the methods of purification. Methods of purification means how you can separate the substances from the mixture. So different techniques can be used. So we will discuss each technique. So what are the learning objectives? You should be able to describe and explain methods of purification by using a suitable solvent, filtration, crystallization, and distillation. And suggest suitable purification technique given information that we will discuss in the last, like we will have different types of mixture and which technique is suitable, that we will discuss. So the first part, the terms related to a mixture, the definitions which you have to learn. The meaning of solute. What is the meaning of a solute? A solid which dissolve in a solvent, we call that as a solute. So example, you have a container and that container is filled with water, and you have crystals of salt. So this one is the salt crystals, and the other one is the water. So the question is, which substance is a solute here? Salt crystals or water? Which substance is a solute? Which of the substance is solute? The salt crystals or the water? So salt crystal, the solid which dissolve in a solvent, what we call that solid? We call that as solute. So this one is a solute, and the water which we use to dissolve the other substance or any liquid which we use, the liquid that the solute dissolve in, that is known as the solvent. And when we mix the solute with solvent, like example, we add these crystals to water and we mix them together, what we call that, we call as a solution. So a solution is formed when a solute mixed with a solvent. So solution formed when a solute dissolve into another solvent, and solute plus solvent result in a formation of a solution. And solution, there are different types of solution. A solution can be a saturated solution. What is the meaning of a saturated solution? The term saturated solution means a solution which contain as much dissolved solute in it at a particular temperature, which means that this solution cannot dissolve any more solute at a particular temperature. We call that as a saturated solution. Example, you have a container and you fill this container with water. So example, you have 10 cm cube of water. That's a volume of solvent which you are using. You have 10 cm cube of water. Now what you did, you add 1 gram of salt in the beginning. You add 1 gram of salt and that dissolve. Then you add 2 gram of a salt, that also dissolve. Then you add 3 grams of a salt. When you add 3 grams of a salt, now it's not able to dissolve that because already much of the salt is dissolved in the solvent. So when the solvent cannot dissolve any more solute at a particular temperature, what we call that, we called that as a saturated solution. So saturated solution means it dissolves solute, but it dissolves the maximum amount of solute at a particular temperature. It cannot dissolve more than that amount. Is it clear? The concept of a saturated solution? A saturated solution which contain a much dissolved solute at a particular temperature means it cannot dissolve any more solute. It is already having lot of solute in it, and it cannot dissolve much solute in it as it is already having. So we call that solution as a saturated solution. So the term saturated solution means the solution which cannot dissolve any more solute at a particular temperature or at a fixed temperature. We simply call that as a saturated solution. So you have a container. That container is filled with water. You can perform this simple experiment at home as well. So what you can do, you can take a glass which is filled with water. So you're adding 1 teaspoon of sugar or a salt at a time. Like example, when I add say 2 grams of salt, first when I add 2 gram of salt, when I add and stir, I find it dissolves. Then I add 3 grams of salt. When I add, I find it also dissolves. But when I add 4 gram of salt, I can see the salt crystals at the base or at the bottom. I can still see the salt crystals. There are crystals which does not dissolve. So if it does not dissolve, so it means this solution is already having enough dissolved salt or enough dissolved solute. It cannot dissolve anymore. So if a solution cannot dissolve any more salt, what we call this type of a solution which is already having a maximum amount of solute, we call this solution as a saturated solution. So there is a limit to which a salt can be dissolved in water, and when we reach that limit, we call that solution as a saturated solution. Is it clear now? The concept of saturated solution? Yeah, the term saturated means solute is added too much in the solvent. So there is a limit to which a solvent can dissolve. It cannot dissolve extra solute, and we call that solution which cannot dissolve an extra solute at a particular temperature. We call that as a saturated solution. Then some of the salts, when the solute is added too much, there will be solvent, but there the solvent is not able to adjust the solute particles in it. So solvent is there. Like you have a container that is filled with water, so the solvent will not, the amount of solvent is not changing. What you are doing, you are adding a solute in it. So you reach a limit where the solvent cannot dissolve any more solute. When the solvent is not able to dissolve any more or extra solute, what we call this solution, we call that solution as a saturated solution. The solvent will be there, the solute is there and the solvent is there, but the solute, the extra solute which we add, it's not able to dissolve, so we call that as a saturated solution. Then a solute can be a soluble solute. Soluble means when the solute can dissolve, and insoluble means it does not dissolve. So for this, you have to learn a table, like how to identify which solutes are soluble and which solutes are insoluble. So for that purpose, you have to learn this table. So solute, so a solute can be a soluble, so soluble solute means when added to solvent, it dissolves. That is called a soluble solute. And a solute can be insoluble solute when added to solvent, it does not dissolve at all. So example, you have a container and that container is filled with water, and you add a solute. So these are the crystals. So when you add this solute and mix and stir, what you will see a clear solution. You will see that only one phase is there and the solute completely dissolved. Like this is what happened when we add sugar to water, or when we add a table salt to water. What we see it completely mix and dissolve. So when it completely mix or dissolve, what we call this solute, a solute which can dissolve in the solvent and make a clear solution, what we call that as, this type of solute is known as a soluble solute. But there are some solids which does not mix with water or the solvent. Like you have a container and this container is filled with water, and you have a solute. When you add this solute to water, what you observe that the solute does not mix with water, or solute does not mix with the solvent. If the solute does not mix with the solvent and you are able to see the solute particles, so what we call this type of solute is known as insoluble solute. So solute does not dissolve and visible. So we call this type of solute as insoluble solute. So there are certain solutes, there are certain solids which are soluble, and there are certain solids which are insoluble. And there's a table for this which you have to memorize or learn. Is it clear till now? The concept of soluble and insoluble solutes. Soluble solute means you add to a solvent, and when you mix them, it will mix and it will make a clear solution. But there are some solutes when you add them to add water, it does not mix and the solute is visible, that type of solute is known as insoluble solutes. Is it clear? The concept of soluble and insoluble solutes. To everyone. Then there is a table which you have to learn or memorize, and it's a very important table which you have to learn or memorize, that are solutes which are soluble. So soluble solutes, number one, all nitrates are soluble. Means those compounds which are having the ending at nitrate, like sodium nitrate, potassium nitrate, they all are soluble solutes. They all dissolve. Most chlorides, I will explain the table. First, I'm completing it. Most chlorides are also soluble except these three. So most of the chlorides, if the compound or solute name like sodium chloride, potassium chloride, so most of them are soluble except three of them. Which three of them? Silver chloride, mercury chloride, and lead chloride. These three chlorides are insoluble, does not mix with water. Other all chlorides mix with water. Then most sulfates are also soluble, they mix with water. Again, three exceptions are there. So the three exceptions, three sulfates which does not mix with water are barium sulfate, lead sulfate, and calcium sulfate. And most of the carbonates, yeah, these all are powdered and solid form. All the solutes are in solid form, but when you add them to water, when water is added, some of them dissolve and some of them does not dissolve. So most of the carbonates are insoluble except three of them. Three of them mix. What are the three? Which mix with water? Sodium carbonate, potassium carbonate, and ammonium carbonate. So this is a very important table which you have to memorize, that the salts on the left hand side, when water is added, they mix, they dissolve, and salts on the right hand side, when water is added, it does not dissolve. So these are the, this is a very important table which you will, because in exam they normally ask how you will, which technique is used to separate a certain salt. So how you can identify that, we will discuss the technique. But before the technique, you should be able to identify whether a salt is soluble or insoluble. So salts, all nitrates are soluble. What is the meaning of all nitrates are soluble? Like example, if I say a solute is potassium nitrate. So a solute is potassium nitrate. What will happen? It will dissolve or it will be insoluble? Potassium nitrate. So how you can identify? You can identify from the name, as all nitrates are soluble means any salt which is having, or any solute which is having a name nitrate, it always dissolve in water. So whether it will dissolve, I want the participation from everyone. Yeah, potassium nitrate, will it dissolve? Yes or no? So it will dissolve. Why? Because it is nitrate and all the nitrate salts are soluble. Same thing, if I give another example, barium nitrate, will it dissolve? Yes or no? So this will also dissolve because all nitrates are soluble. If I change the name as sodium chloride, sodium chloride, will it dissolve? Sodium chloride, most of the chlorides are soluble. As you can see in this table, most of the chlorides, most of the salts which are chloride are soluble, except three: silver, mercury and lead. So this is not a silver, mercury or lead. So this sodium chloride will be soluble, means when you add water it will dissolve. Is it clear? Same thing, if we have barium sulfate, barium sulfate, will it dissolve? Yes or no? Barium sulfate, when you check, most of the sulfates are soluble except three: barium, lead and calcium. So barium sulfate is insoluble, it does not dissolve. So I will share this table with you after the session, after completing the class, and you have to learn this table. that the salts which dissolve and the salts which does not dissolve. Why it is important? Because the technique which we use to separate the solute, it depends on the type of the salt, whether it is a soluble or it is insoluble. So the method or a techniques which we use, there are different techniques which we use. Filtration, filter, it is normally used for insoluble solid. So if we want to separate the insoluble solid, we can use filtration, centrifuging. If we want to separate insoluble solid from solvent, we can use centrifuging. And if we want to separate the soluble solid means the solid dissolved from solution, because when solute mix with solvent, it will make a solution. So if we want to separate a soluble solid from solution, we can use evaporation. I will discuss each technique in detail. Same thing, crystallization can be used to separate the two soluble solid from the solution. The term distillation, if we want a solvent from the solution, we use distillation. If we want to fraction distillation, if we want to separate two liquids from each other, two or more, we use this technique. And chromatography, that already we discussed, that if you want to separate different substances from a solution or colors or ink, we can use this chromatography. Now we'll discuss each technique in detail. The first one is filtration. So what we do in filtration, this technique is used to separate insoluble solute from solvent. So if we have insoluble solute and we want to separate it from the solvent, what we do, we can use a filtration. Example, you have a container which is filled with water as a solvent, and you have silver chloride. Silver chloride is an insoluble solute. Example, silver chloride. So if we have insoluble solute which is mixed with a solvent, so what we do, we use a filtration. How we carry out this filtration? We take a filter funnel. This is a filter funnel. Then on this filter funnel, what we place? We place a filter paper. So a paper is placed here. That is called a filter paper. Then we add this mixture of solute and solvent, insoluble solute and solvent. So when we add this on the filter paper, the solid is not able to pass. So that solid will left on the filter paper, and through the filter funnel, a liquid is able to pass through. So as this liquid is able to pass through, a solid is left on the filter paper. So a solid which is left on the filter paper, what we call that? We call that as a residue. And the solvent which passes through the filter paper, what we call that as? We call that as a filtrate. So by this technique, a solute is separated from the solvent by help of a filter funnel and a filter paper, is simply known as filtration. So filtration is normally used to separate insoluble solute. Like example, if you want to separate sand from water, you want to separate different insoluble solute as we discussed. So it can be any of the insoluble solute, such as the examples of insoluble solutes like sand, or most chlorides are soluble except silver chloride, mercury chloride, or lead chloride. Most sulfates are also soluble except barium sulfate, lead sulfate, or calcium sulfate. So if we want to separate these solutes from the solvent, we can use, and most of the carbonates can be separated by this way. So if the question is a simple question, name the technique or name the method used to separate what is the filtered solid? The solid which is left on the filtered paper, the solid which is left on the filter paper, that is called a filtered solid. So example, if the question is name the method used to separate, say, barium sulfate from water. So which name a method used to separate barium sulfate from water? These are all examples of insoluble solute, means they are not mixed in water or mixed with water. So which technique we can use? We can use filtration. And the second part, sometimes they ask label the apparatus or label the residue and filtrate. So sometimes they ask to draw. So you should be able to draw the filter funnel. What you will draw? You don't have to draw the beaker. You can simply draw the filter funnel, and at the bottom you can have a conical flask, or at the bottom you can have a beaker. A filter funnel, what we have to label residue. So what is left, you can make the solid which is left on the filter paper, that is known as the residue, and what passes through the filter funnel, that is known as filtrate. Now, which substance will be residue here? We have barium sulfate. We want to separate barium sulfate from water. So what will be residue? Barium sulfate or water? Which of the substance is a residue here? So barium sulfate, because barium sulfate does not dissolve, it's a solid. So barium sulfate will be the residue. And what about filtrate? Which substance will be filtrate? So water will, which is passes through the filter paper and filter funnel, that is the filtrate. Is it clear, the concept of filtration and the cases in what condition we can use filtration? So simply if we want to separate the insoluble solute, we can use filtration. There is also another way to separate the insoluble solute. So what we can use, the other way, so we can also use decanting. What is the meaning of it? Is not 100% accurate, but this can be done. What we do in a decanting, first we allow the solid to settle down. Like example, you have a mixture of solute and solvent, but solute does not mix. It's clearly visible. So this solute is clearly visible. We can see this solute. So what we do, we gradually transfer the solvent out, the, the liquid out from this. And when we gradually or slowly transfer the liquid out from this mixture, we call this technique as decanting. But decanting, what is the advantage of decanting? Decanting is a fast process, but it is not accurate. And what is the advantage of filtration? Filtration is an accurate process, but what is the disadvantage? It will take time. So when we compare filtration, if we want very pure substance, if we compare filtration with decanting, if we need very pure substance, we prefer filtration. But if we want to save the time and do it quickly, then we prefer decanting. Is it clear? The difference between the decanting and filtration? Any doubt till now? Yeah, decanting is not accurate. That I mentioned. When we compare a decanting with filtration, the disadvantage of decanting, it is not accurate. Maybe when you're transferring the solvent to another container, maybe some solute particle, insoluble solute particle may also move. That there is a chance. So that's why is a fast process, but it is not accurate. Filtration is a slow process, but it is accurate. Both can be done depending on what we need. When we need 100% pure substance, then we prefer filtration. If we want to save the time and do it in a short time, then we prefer decanting. So I'll share another link, end this session and share another link.